So this is an addendum to the previous talk I did on the Gentile Times, where I admitted we didn't really understand the Gentile Times on the Jewish nation themselves, remembering that Leviticus 26 was a malediction in the law of Moses, that they would have to pay 7 times for their sins of idolatry, walking in opposition to Jehovah, which is a form of idolatry. It's not serving him, it's opposing him. We thought that this period ended with the Balfour Declaration, but it did not, because we hadn't quite grasped at the time how I can't call it the Jewish Gentile Times, that would be an oxymoron or something. We're calling it the Israeli Gentile Times, and it's a malediction on God's people, prohibiting them from having a ruler which is one of them, which is different from the regular Gentile Times, which is actually not on the physical Jews, but on God's people, who were the physical Jews at the time that this penalty was run up. The way the Gentile Times on God's people works, any group which is officially God's people, which in other words is any group with the water baptism, any group which is covenanted into the Isaiah church covenant by either through the law of Moses, which was a sub-covenant of the Isaiah church covenant, or through any of the 4 Elijah covenants of the 4 true churches, water baptism covenants, any people of God's who screw up, run up for all of the people of God, this error, this malediction, which is why God says that I'm visiting the error of fathers upon sons and grandsons, and to the 3rd and the 4th generation. And I explained in the last talk that the Gentile Times on God's people, rather than on the Jews, who were God's people, but then got replaced by the Christians in the first true church, who got replaced by the Christians in the second, who got replaced by the Christians in the third, which was the Watchtower, who got replaced by the Christians in the fourth, which is the Lord's Witnesses. So anybody in God's people gets affected by the sins of the fathers, and the fathers were the Jews, the sons were the first true Christian church, the grandsons were the second under Paul, the great-grandsons were the Watchtower under Russell's water baptism, and the great-great-grandsons under my water baptism. And the malediction is that you don't get a king who is a representative of God from amongst your people, but who is a representative of God. With the Jews it's different, because they ceased to be God's people when the land and circumcision covenant expired with the conversion of Cornelius in 36 Tishri 14. So you can't then say, well, they're being maledicted as God's people and they're not going to get a ruler who's chosen by God, because since they're not God's people anymore, God wouldn't be picking their ruler. So the malediction is not on them having a ruler who represents God, it's just on them having a ruler who is one of them, a genetic physical Jew, a son of Israel genetically, son of Jacob. So the malediction did not begin when the son of Jacob, called Josiah, was killed by Pharaoh Necho and replaced by his son, actually, Eliakim, who was a vassal of Necho. That started the Gentile Times over God's true people. It did not start the Gentile Times over the Jews, because their king was still a Jew, even though he was actually a vassal, not of Jehovah, but of Pharaoh. And the last king of Israel, that everybody thinks is the last king of Israel in the line of David, was Zedekiah, who got deposed and blinded after all his sons were killed in front of him by the charming Nebuchadnezzar. And that happened in 586 Tammuz. So that began the Israeli Gentile Times, a malediction of 20 years, 7 times the idolatry era of Israel. And the idolatry era of Israel, to be precise, it began with the idolatry of Jeroboam, the king of Israel, who deliberately did not celebrate booths in 997. So Tishri 15, 997, the first day of booths, he deliberately didn't celebrate it because, for political reasons, he thought, I know what, I'll set up another one in the next month, a late booths he decided to set up, and we'll get Israel to celebrate that, because then they won't be going down to Jerusalem. If they go to Jerusalem, since I'm split away as a kingdom, my 10 tribes, I might lose them. They might think, oh, I prefer this temple in Jerusalem, it's very nice. And then I'll lose power and control over my people. And he was more concerned in his immediate headship and power and control, like nearly all men are, than he was in serving God. He had no interest in serving God, he had an interest in keeping power over his people, which is the satanic MO of every false church and every politician, basically. You don't play politics with God. If you do, it's idolatry. So that's what he did, and what he then did is run up this era of 390 years until 607 Tishri 15. The reason that the Gentile Times began on Tishri 15 is when the idolatry of Jeroboam and of Israel began. 390 years is how long it lasts, according to Ezekiel chapter 4. That was the number of days that Ezekiel lay on one or other of his sides. And then there was a 40-year era of Judah, making a total era of 390 plus 40, which is 430. And that is split into 360 years of idolatry era and 70 years of Sabbath era. And as I said, I think Franz believed, Freddie Franz, the 4th president of the Watchtower, believed that it was possible to calculate that Sabbath era, but didn't know how to do it. And the Watchtower actually said, the magazine, no, it's impossible to calculate. So I calculated it, it's not that difficult. 1473 is when the Jews entered into the Promised Land. So the first Sabbath year, they run Tishri to Tishri, began 6 years after that, which is 1467 Tishri to 1466 Tishri. You have a Jubilee system up to the 50th year. You count all the Sabbaths and all the Jubilees, and you find in the period from 997 to 607 Tishri, there are 63 Sabbath or Jubilee years. A Jubilee year is a land Sabbath year. And that's the 63 Sabbaths of Israel. And then in the 40 years of the era of Judah, which ran from 647 to 607 Tishri, there are 7 Sabbath or Jubilee years. The total of Sabbaths and Jubilees that they therefore missed was 63 plus 7 equals 70. That's why there was a 70-year exile in Babylon. And their idolatry era is the 430 less that 70 is 390 for Israel plus 40 for Judah, making 430 less the 70 years of Sabbath era. That's 360. And you multiply that by 7, you get 7 times 360, which is 2520, which is the Gentile Times. And the literal fulfillment, according to Leviticus 26, that's on the Jews. And so it began when Zedekiah was deposed and they no longer had a king who was Jewish. He was taken in captivity to Babylon. And it would have run for 25-20 years from 586, it would have run to 1935. But it didn't, for this reason. There's a crazy scripture, really, in Jeremiah 52 verses 31 to 34, I think, and in 2 Kings 25 verses 27 to 30, where it says that the evil Merodach, after Nebuchadnezzar died, evil Merodach, which I think was his son, I think he killed his father, normal method of accession. He decided he quite liked Jehoiachin, who was replaced by Eliakim, who was replaced by Zedekiah. So Jehoiachin was taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar in 604 with the first campaign Nebuchadnezzar waged conquering Jerusalem. And he'd been rotting in prison there under Nebuchadnezzar, but evil Merodach, who wasn't quite as evil as his name would lead one to believe, released him. And then this is the crazy thing, it says, and he lifted him up, lifted up his head, actually. His head he lifted up. And he put his throne higher than all the other thrones of the kings in Babylon. Making the scripture making it plain that he had a throne which was high. So in other words, of all the conquered kings, in other words, of all the kings in the global or international empire of Babylon, it was a bit like the EU, he was regarded as the number 1 king out of all the other kings. So he was reigning. His throne was higher than their thrones. He had a throne and he was recognized as a king. He was permitted to rule the Jews as a vassal of evil Merodach, just as Eliakim, who became Jehoiakim, had ruled as a vassal of Pharaoh Necho. The Gentile Times on the Jews was suspended in Babylon. Once Jehoiachin, who's also known as Jeconiah, was let out of prison by evil Merodach. Then he ruled from his throne as a vassal of evil. I mean a vassal of old evil Merodach, not an evil vassal. And then the scripture then goes on to say, in 2 Kings 25 it says, "And as for his allowance, an allowance was constantly given him from the king, commanded day by day all the days of his life." And it says pretty much the same thing in Jeremiah 52. It says, "An allowance was constantly given him from the king of Babylon, commanded day by day until the day of his death, all the days of his life." And nobody knows, on reading that, how long his life was. And there's some speculation that he died, or at least stopped being given his allowance, when evil Merodach died. But that isn't the case, because I know how long his life was, because when two scriptures, or even one scripture, says the following, in verse 29 and 30 of 2 Kings 25, it says, "And he took," this is what evil Merodach did, "he took off his prison garments," the garments of Jehoiachin, "and he ate bread constantly before him all the days of his life." And then in verse 30, "And as for his allowance, the allowance was constantly given him from the king, commanded day by day, all the days of his life." And then in Jeremiah 52, verse 33, it's, "And he ate bread before him constantly all the days of his life." And then in 34, it says, "Until the day of his death, all the days of his life." When the scriptures go on and on and on like that, the scriptures are complete. God doesn't, like man does, give you a set of directions and then forget to put one sign up so you get completely lost. So when it says all the days of his life, all the days of his life, all the days of his life, till the day of his death, somehow it's telling you how many days that was. And it's the sentence count. Sentence counts are triggered by a list with more than 3 things. And what evil Merodach did is, when he let him out of prison, what the scripture says in verse 27 of 2 Kings 25, "Evil Merodach, king of Babylon, raised up in the year of reign of him," which is assumed to be his first regnal year, he only actually reigned for 2, "namely, head of Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, out of the house of detention. And he began to speak good things with him, to put his throne higher than the thrones of the kings that were with him in Babylon. And he took off his prison garments, and he ate bread constantly before him." Actually, it is ambiguous as to who took his prison garments off. Whereas in Jeremiah 52, he proceeded to bring him up forth from the prison house, and he began to speak good things with him, and to put his throne higher than the thrones of the kings that were with him in Babylon. And he took off his prison garment, and he ate bread before him constantly all the days of his life. Yeah, there's an ambiguity as to who took his garments off. It's a bit weird for a king. Well, a king would arrange for the garments to be removed. I don't know that you can just take your prison garments off. I would imagine actually that that's something that the king would do. Anyway, if he did, you got a list of 3. You need a list of 3 to trigger a sentence count. And the way the sentence count works is this. He spoke good things to him. That's a Hebrew plural. That counts as 3 times, because a jewel is 2 times. He put his throne higher than the thrones of the kings that were with him. That's 1 throne compared with a plural of thrones, the Hebrew plural. That's 1 compared with 3, which is 1 plus 3. Put them all on the table. 1, 3 makes 4. So we now got 3 plus 4. And he took off his prison garments. That's another 3, because it's a Hebrew plural. That makes 7 plus 3 is 10. And he ate bread all the days of his life. It's another Hebrew plural. That makes 13. And it's the same sentence count both in Jeremiah 52 and in 2 Kings 25. So it's 13 years was the period during which he lived and ate bread. I have the answer. Sorry. He took off his prison garments. Right? That's what evil Merodach did to Jehoiachin. Then to Jehoiachin. And then it says, "And he ate bread before him all the days of his life." Now, the thing is, evil Merodach only lived 2 years. So it's all the days of evil Merodach's life Jehoiachin was eating bread before him. Because he couldn't have eaten bread before evil Merodach when evil Merodach was dead. However, as for his allowance was constantly given him from the king of Babylon, commanded day by day until the day of his death. So, In other words, he ate bread in front of evil Merodach until the day of his death, Merodach's death, but he continued to eat bread in front of whoever the king of Babylon was until the day of his own death. And that period is this sentence count of 13 times, or 13 years. When you have a sentence count of 13, it means it's more than 12 and less than or equal to 13. So there's a gap in the Israeli Gentile times of more than 12 years and less than or equal to 13 years. And so what that means is it ends not in 1935, but it ends sometime before 1948 Tammuz, since it started in 586 Tammuz. And it so happens that in 1948, on Sivan 3, which is the month before Tammuz, on May the 14th at midnight, the British mandate to govern Palestine, which it was granted by the League of Nations, expired. And at that very minute, pretty much, Ben Gurion, who was running Israel, declared and proclaimed the state of Israel, and he was instantly recognised, that state, by President Harry Truman. So that at that point, the Hebrews once again had a government that was run by, it wasn't a king so much, but I mean it was a kind of composite democratic king that was from themselves. So that's when they became a self-governing group once more. And that was 20 years after Zedekiah got deposed, plus 13-year gap in the malediction for the period when they were ruled over by Jehoiachin in Babylon. I mean, everyone thinks, oh, Jehoiachin got 3 months and then got deposed by Eliakim. True. But when he was in Babylon, he was taken captive to Babylon when he got deposed by Nebuchadnezzar. But when evil Merodach turned up, he released him and gave him his throne back, so that he became a vassal king for evil Merodach. And that extends the Israeli Gentile times by the 13 years, which brings it to the 1948 date when Israel became its own state. And one other thing I must say is that the Exodanic times ends and begins on the first day of cakes. The alienation times runs from Pentecost to Pentecost, and the Gentile times runs from the first day of booths to the first day of booths. And in a sense, these three great mandatory festivals, cakes, booths and Pentecost, are a celebration of the ends of maledictions. But the physical, literal reason in judicial terms why the Gentile times begins on Tishri 15 is because Jeroboam began his idolatry on Tishri 15 by deliberately deciding not to celebrate God's true festival and instead invented his own false festival a month later. So his idolatry began Tishri 15, it lasted 390 years until the error started to be paid off, and that was 390 years later after 997 Tishri 15, which is 607 Tishri 15. So that's why the Gentile times begins and ends on Tishri 15. Incidentally, the literal meaning of Leviticus 26 is the Israeli Gentile times. The greater word symbolic meanings, there's 4 of them for the 4 recitals of the penalty of 7 times, are the discontinuous Gentile times, the continuous Gentile times, Laodicean Gentile times, and the kingdom Gentile times. And in Daniel 4, the event symbolic meaning of the dream is the malediction that befell Nebuchadnezzar for 7 years, and the greater meanings, again it's recited 4 times, the penalty of 7 times, are the same 4 Gentile times I just recited. So both Leviticus 26 and Daniel 4 relate to all 4 Gentile times on God's true people, but the literal account of the one is Nebuchadnezzar, and the literal account of the other and his malediction, and the literal account of the other is the Israeli Gentile times. Thank you.